Section 5, Overview of Facilities and Safety Management Principles, a basis for biosafety and biosecurity. Learning objectives. Following completion of this session, participants will be able to describe the principles and guidance of the CLSI Quality System Essential, QC. Facilities and safety management describe how facility design and modification affect staff efficiency and safety, manage access to laboratory areas, manage facility use, and maintenance, organize communications, effectively describe a variety of safety programs applicable to laboratories. Introduction to Quality System Essential, QC Facilities and Safety Management. QC Facilities and Safety Management provides information about the laboratory's physical environment and the maintenance and safety programs needed to support it. The laboratory should work with its organization's facility planning department to develop processes for laboratory building and renovation projects. The projects should ensure the best possible design for efficiency, comfort, ergonomics, accommodations for people with disabilities, emergency systems, instrumentation specifications, and unidirectional workflow to reduce waste. The laboratory needs a means to ensure that international, national, accreditation, local, and organizational requirements for current and planned space are met. QC Facilities and Safety Management. QC Facilities and Safety Management and ISO. CISO 15 QC Facilities and Safety Management. QC Facilities and Safety Management and ISO. CISO 15189 to 2022 ISO/IEC 17025 to 2017 ISO 9000 and 1 to 2015 Facilities and Safety Management 6.3 Facilities and Environmental Conditions. 6.3 Accommodation and Environmental Conditions 7.1.3 Resources. Infrastructure 7.1.4 Environment for the operation of processes. QC Facilities and Safety Management, Facility Design and Modification. Policy Processes Procedures Facility Design and Modification, process to allocate laboratory space, determining space requirements and needs, process to design and modify facilities, process to plan for adequate energy sources, lighting, ventilation, water, waste disposal, and utilities, evaluating facility design and renovation plans, disposing of non-hazardous waste, verifying the quality of the facility's deionized water in the laboratory. QC Facilities and Safety Management, Facility Design and Modification. The laboratory design needs to support efficient operation and quality examinations, optimize the comfort of its occupants, provide for adequate storage space, and minimize the risk of injury and occupational illness. The design should consider reasonable accommodations and access for persons with disabilities, adequate emergency response systems, maintenance of confidentiality, environmental requirements, protection from hazards, chemically resistant, and easily cleaned surfaces support. For examinations, adequate communication system separation of work areas to prevent cross-contamination, emergency power. QC Facilities and Safety Management, Access. Policy Processes Procedures Access, process to authorize facility access using the laboratory's access control devices. QC Facilities and Safety Management, Access. Controlled access is required for areas requiring biosecurity and records protection, access to supplies and patient specimens, with appropriate identification such as markings, notices, and symbols at the access points. QC Facilities and Safety Management, Facilities Use and Maintenance. Policy Processes Procedures Facilities Use and Maintenance, processes to maintain facilities, maintaining clean work areas, reporting a maintenance request to facilities management, process to monitor environmental conditions, monitoring, controlling and recording environmental conditions. QC Facilities and Safety Management, Facilities Use and Maintenance. The laboratory needs to monitor, document, and control its environmental conditions as required, or when these could influence the quality of examination results or laboratory services. Such conditions include, as appropriate to technical activities, sterility, electrical supply, desk temperature, electronic interference, sound levels, radiation, vibration levels, humidity, ventilation. QC facilities and safety management, facilities use and maintenance. The laboratory needs to provide relevant storage space and environmental conditions to ensure the continuing integrity of specimens, laboratory supplies, slides, test kits, blood products, equipment, retained microorganisms, documents, reagents, records. QC facilities and safety management, communication systems. Policy, processes, procedures, communication systems, infrastructure processes to communicate to all laboratory stakeholders, using the telephone system as a laboratory intercom, using social media, using the automatic calling feature to contact personnel in emergencies. QC facilities and safety management, communication systems. The laboratory needs a communication system appropriate for its size and complexity. The system should support the efficient transfer of messages and include a process to contact personnel in emergencies. Common examples include social media, telephone, pagers, and email. QC facilities and safety management. Safety training must be provided for all personnel, including provision of any required personal protective equipment, PPE. A risk assessment of work processes should be completed, documenting any identified risks, and prioritizing risks for acquiring and transmitting infections. Periodic reviews of safe work practices, often referred to as safety audits, should be completed and documented to identify and reduce any hazards or hazardous practices. Although adherence to safety requirements is an individual responsibility, monitoring to ensure personnel follow all required safety precautions as needed and documenting any necessary corrective action for noncompliance is required. QC facilities and safety management, biosafety. Policy, processes, procedures, biosafety, process to perform safety risk assessments of workflow processes and procedures and of containment levels involving biological materials. Process to develop and maintain exposure control plans for BBP and TB and other airborne pathogens, conducting an annual safety audit, assessing risks to mitigate infection control risks, reporting infection surveillance, prevention and control information programmed to train on infection control for BBP and TB and other airborne pathogens. See also subchapter 3.4.3, conducting BBP training, conducting training on TB and other airborne pathogens, process to periodically, as required, evaluate the effectiveness of the infection control plans. Conducting the periodic BBP and TB and other airborne pathogens safety audits, process to transport potentially biohazardous materials, preparing potentially biohazardous materials for shipping, completing biohazardous materials shipping records. QC facilities and safety management, biosafety. All laboratory disciplines and activities need to be integrated into organization-wide infection prevention and control activities with an assigned individual responsible for the management of infection prevention. Each laboratory needs to develop and implement infection control plans as appropriate for its services. The laboratory needs to have a method for communicating to personnel, visitors, and patients their respective responsibilities for preventing and controlling infection. QC facilities and safety management, biosafety. The laboratory's written infection prevention and control goals should be based on its prioritized risks and should include limiting unprotected exposure to pathogens, limiting the transmission of infections associated with performing procedures, limiting the transmission of infections associated with using laboratory equipment, devices, and supplies, improving compliance with hand hygiene guidelines. QC facilities and safety management, biosafety. And exposure control plans need to include specific plans for BBP, for TB, and other airborne pathogens, and for pathogens with other transmission routes, risk assessment of activities performed in the laboratory, risk mitigation in place for personnel performing these activities through use of appropriate engineering controls, e.g., biosafety cabinets, work practice controls, e.g., hand washing, and PPE, e.g., appropriate foot protection, gloves, clothing, respirators, to minimize personnel. Exposures A hepatitis vaccination program, a program to monitor and follow up on personnel exposures to BBP, TB, and other airborne pathogens and pathogens with other transmission routes. QC facilities and safety management, biosafety. And exposure control plans need to include continued spill containment and cleanup procedures, a post exposure follow up program, including post exposure counseling and the administration of prophylaxis prevention of needle stick and sharps injuries, a program to monitor and follow up on. Personnel needle stick and sharps injuries, new personnel, and refresher safety training, including engineering and work practice controls, PPE, and maintenance of safety training records. QC facilities and safety management, biosafety. And exposure control plans need to include continued A process to evaluate the effectiveness of each exposure control plan in reducing or eliminating exposures. Annually and whenever risks change, consideration of emerging and re-emerging infections in the community that could potentially affect laboratory services. QC facilities and safety management, biosafety. Each laboratory that ships potentially infectious substances needs to develop and document a plan for packing and shipping infectious substances that includes a process to determine the shipping requirements for infectious substances as required by national and regional regulations, a procedure for preparing the shipping container, a procedure for completing the shipper's declaration and retaining the required documentation, a training program for all personnel involved in the packaging and shipping process, which includes initial training in the processes, any changes in requirements, and record keeping. QC facilities and safety management, chemical hygiene. Policy processes, procedures, chemical hygiene, process to perform safety risk assessments of workflow processes and procedures involving chemicals, process to develop and maintain a CHP and hazard communication. Evaluating each chemical in use for hazards and defining handling requirements, managing SDS program to train on the CHP. See also subchapter 3.4.3, cleaning up chemical spills, conducting CHP training. Process to periodically, as needed, review the effectiveness of the CHP, conducting them. Periodic CHP safety audit. QC facilities and safety management, chemical hygiene. The laboratory needs to develop a written chemical hygiene plan, CHP, that evaluates the potential hazards of chemicals used and communicates hazard information and appropriate protective measures to personnel. The CHP should include a process for hazard evaluation of chemicals in the workplace and identification of appropriate protective measures, including the use of fume hoods and respirators when appropriate, spill containment and cleanup procedures, list of hazardous chemicals present in the laboratory, and a process to maintain current information as chemicals are added to the laboratory inventory. QC facilities and safety management, chemical hygiene. The CHP should include continued labeling of containers of chemicals in the workplace, a process to obtain or create and maintain a library of SDS for all chemicals in the workplace, a process to annually review the effectiveness of the CHP and the protective measures in place, a process to provide training to personnel, including the use of engineering and work practices and maintenance of CHP training records. QC facilities and safety management, occupational health. Policy processes, procedures, occupational health, laboratory incidents, accidents, and illness, process to manage laboratory incidents and accidents, reporting laboratory incidents, accidents, and near misses. Reviewing accident/incident reports, reporting laboratory acquired illnesses and occupational exposures, e.g., to HIV, hepatitis B virus, program to immunize personnel as required, and maintain related immunization records. Storing personnel immunization records, process to monitor and mitigate noise levels, establishing and recording decibel levels in the laboratory. QC facilities and safety management, occupational health. Each laboratory needs a program to investigate, record, and report all laboratory injuries, accidents, and laboratory-acquired illnesses, reporting to the larger organization, and local, regional, and national agencies can also be required. The laboratory's program to report and investigate NCEs can be used for this purpose. QC facilities and safety management, hazardous waste management. Policy processes procedures hazardous waste management, process to develop a hazardous waste disposal plan identifying waste stream, disposing of various types of the laboratory's hazardous waste program to train on hazardous waste management. See also subchapter 3.4.3, conducting hazardous waste management training. QC facilities and safety management, hazardous waste management. Each laboratory needs to develop and implement a hazardous waste management and disposal plan that complies with national and regional requirements, includes personnel training, provides a process to create, retain, and evaluate records of hazardous waste management from acquisition to disposal. QC facilities and safety management, fire prevention. Policy processes procedures fire prevention, process to develop a fire prevention and control plan, reporting a fire, taking follow-up action, evacuating the laboratory program to train on use of fire extinguishers. See also subchapter 3.4.3, conducting fire extinguisher training. QC facilities and safety management, fire prevention. Each laboratory needs to develop a fire prevention and control program that includes fire extinguisher training-related personnel training records, QC facilities and safety management, emergency preparedness. Policy processes procedures emergency management, preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery process to develop internal and external preparedness plans, including response to bioterrorism and chemical terrorism. Providing emergency responses and first aid, activating assigned roles and responsibilities for laboratory personnel in a declared disaster, implementing the business recovery plan process to develop an emergency response plan, evacuating the laboratory in specific situations, conducting and recording regular evacuation drills, posting evacuation routes, program to train on emergency preparedness and response. See also subchapter 3.4.3, conducting emergency preparedness and response training. QC facilities and safety management, emergency preparedness. Each laboratory needs to develop an emergency management plan that describes its approach to internal and external disasters. A hazard vulnerability analysis should be conducted to identify potential emergencies that could affect the need for laboratory services or its ability to provide those services. This plan should identify specific processes and related activities for preparedness, response, mitigation, recovery, actions, and responsibilities. QC facilities and safety management, emergency preparedness. Examples of topics to include in the emergency preparedness plan are first aid handling of fire and electrical equipment malfunctions, facility evacuation plans that include predetermined primary and secondary evacuation route-specific arrangements for evacuating patients, visitors, and persons with disabilities, posted evacuation routes in all areas of the facility that include specific plans for patients, visitors, and persons with disabilities, personnel contact list for emergencies, and their roles during an emergency. QC facilities and safety management, emergency preparedness. Examples of topics to include in the emergency preparedness plan are plans for maintaining laboratory operations following an emergency or disaster, external disasters, such as earthquakes, in which immediate evacuation might not be the safest response plans for chemical, biological, and radiological incidents, to include bioterrorism, chemical terrorism, and emergency evacuation of high containment, e.g. Biosafety Level 3 and Biosafety Level 4, Laboratories Periodic Evacuation. Emergency and Disaster Response Drills Business Recovery Plan for identifying alternative resources, equipment, and services. QC facilities and safety management, radiation safety. Policy processes procedures radiation safety as applicable process to develop a radiation safety program using radiation safety badges properly, posting radiation signage, monitoring radiation exposure, taking action when acceptable levels are exceeded, program to train on radiation safety. See also subchapter 3.4.3, conducting radiation safety training. QC facilities and safety management, radiation safety. Each laboratory whose personnel could potentially be exposed to radiation needs a written radiation safety program that includes risk assessment of activities performed in the laboratory and protection of personnel performing these activities by implementing appropriate engineering and work practices and using PPE to minimize personnel exposures, new personnel, and annual refresher training program that includes the proper use of radiation safety badges and maintenance of radiation safety. Training records. QC facilities and safety management, safety training. Each laboratory needs well-defined processes for new personnel training and refresher training as required for all personnel in all applicable safety programs. Infection control transport of biological specimens, standard precautions, emergency preparedness, BP, biosecurity, chemical hygiene, and hazard communication, radiation, safety, compressed gas, and cryogenic material laboratory. Ergonomics and physical accommodations, hazardous waste disposal, safe work practices. Discussion/activity review. List the ways that this QC applies to your laboratory. List all of the laboratory documents pertaining to this QC. Discussion/activity review answers. Laboratory documents for QC, facilities and safety management, facility design process, biological/chemical/radiation/fire safety manual, SPs, and training, laboratory safety audit tool, protecting staff in the laboratory, occupational hazard, safety data sheet, environmental temperature logs, safety equipment assurance logs, emergency preparedness, SOPs, and training. Quality system essential, QC facilities and safety management in practice and application. QC facilities and safety requirements. A. Facility design and modification. B. Access. C. Facilities use and maintenance. D. Communications system. Safety programs, biosafety, chemical hygiene, occupational health, laboratory accidents, and illness, hazardous waste management, fire prevention, emergency management, radiation safety as applicable. A1. Facility design and modification. Space allocation, facility design. A2. Space allocation and design. Work with architects to determine space requirements for current and future needs. Equipment. Reagent, supply, and sample storage. Administrative, technical, and clerical workspace. Common rooms, e.g., bath, break, meeting, and training. Consider workflow direction within the laboratory. Determine areas where cross-contamination is possible or where there are workflow incompatibilities. Ensure required environmental conditions can be met. Identify and address special needs. Case study, new analyzer ABC FS1. QC facilities and safety requirement application to analyzer ABC facility design and modification. In preparing for the new analyzer, the automated testing section supervisor assessed whether the laboratory had adequate space for the new analyzer and storage of consumables. Although no additional space was needed, the allocated space needed some renovation, how the analyzer fit into the current path of workflow. No modifications to path of workflow would be needed. The need for architectural or structural changes for energy sources, ventilation, water, waste disposal, and utilities. Whether there was any potential for cross-contamination between work cells, no change was needed. B1. Access. B2. Access to the laboratory. In the QC facilities and safety policy, state which job titles have access to which laboratory areas. Define criteria and process for access authorization. Install access control devices where needed. Case study, new analyzer ABC FS2. QC facilities and safety requirement application to analyzer ABC access. The new analyzer requires specially trained staff to operate it and has been installed in a room off a hallway to which non-laboratory staff currently have access. AS. As a result, the automated testing section supervisor developed and implemented criteria for authorization, i.e., who will be allowed admittance, a process for authorizing admittance, access control devices, e.g., key, passcode, or key card. Access was given to authorized personnel who were identified in accordance with the laboratory's policy. C1. Facilities use and maintenance. Facility maintenance, monitoring of environmental conditions storage. C2. Facilities maintenance. A policy statement specifying who is responsible for cleaning and housekeeping processes for the cleaning and housekeeping activities, the who, what, when, and where. Procedures to provide instructions for the process activities, the how to do it. Facility maintenance needs. C3. Monitoring environmental conditions. Temperature, humidity, noise, sterility, hazardous fumes, radiation, where applicable. Monitoring for. C4. Storage. Space 4. Inventory of reagents and supplies, sample archiving. Short and long-term retention, documents and records. Environmental conditions that ensure integrity of samples, reagents, supplies, backup equipment, documents, and records. Case study. New analyzer ABC FS3. QC facilities and safety requirement application to analyzer ABC facilities use and maintenance. The new analyzer is sensitive to environmental conditions, and the examination process requires that samples and reagents are stored at different temperatures. The automated testing section supervisor verified there was adequate and appropriate storage for reagents, supplies, and samples, implemented processes and procedures for housekeeping, i.e., cleaning the work area, monitoring, recording, and controlling the environmental conditions for reagents, supplies, and sample storage. Appropriate for the facility's size and complexity, supports the efficient transfer of messages to staff, e.g., telephone, pagers, emails, includes processes for contacting staff in emergencies. D1. Communications system. Case study. New analyzer ABC FS4. QC facilities and safety requirement application to analyzer ABC communications system. The new analyzer will be installed in a room separate from the main laboratory due to the sensitivity of the examinations it performs. The automated testing section supervisor determined that the laboratory will continue using the existing system of posting analyzer-specific messages in a shift log for the analyzer. Bulletin boards and emails will continue to be used for routine communication. The existing emergency telephone calling protocol will also be used. E1. Safety programs. Adherence to safety is an individual responsibility. Everyone. 56. E2. Safety program considerations. Identify program requirements, develop and implement programs, ensure compliance with applicable national, regional, and local requirements. Provide essential personal protective equipment, PPE, train to safety programs and proper use of PPE record training. E3. Types of safety programs: biosafety programs, radiation, safety, fire prevention, hazardous waste management, emergency management, occupational health, chemical hygiene. 58. E4. Biosafety program, exposure control. Assess risk, provide PPE, implement immunization program, develop procedures for prevention of needle sticks, spill containment, spill cleanup, monitor and follow up on exposures. E5. Biosafety program, transportation. Determine shipping requirements, develop a process for packing, provide instructions on completing the shipper's declaration or manifest, train staff and record training. Initial refresher. Transportation of potentially biohazardous materials. E6. Biosafety program, training. Conduct initial and refresher training. includes sessions on infection control, transport of potentially biohazardous material. Discuss safe work practice, proper use of appropriate PPE record training. E7. Biosafety program, evaluation, conduct regular, safety compliance audits, analyze data from exposure incidents, chemical, hygiene, plan. E8. Chemical hygiene program, 1. Develop a chemical hygiene plan, CHP, and hazard communication plan, train, review. E9. Chemical hygiene program, 2. Inventory and evaluate potential chemical hazards. Implement an identification and labeling system. Provide appropriate PP. Develop and implement. Associated processes and procedures. Define handling requirements. Provide and maintain safety data sheets, SDSs, formerly MSDS. E10. Chemical hygiene program. Training. Conduct initial and periodic refresher training. Includes sessions on different types of chemicals, proper storage, proper handling. Discuss safe work practice, location, and access to SDS's record training. E11. Chemical hygiene program. Review. Audit the protective measures in place. Assess the effectiveness of the program. Record the review. E12. Occupational health program. 1. Injuries, accidents, acquired illness. To report, investigate, and record. E12. Occupational health program. 2. Processes 4. Monitoring and mitigating noise levels. Monitoring air quality and temperatures. Evaluation of the ergonomics of workstations. This monitoring relates to slide 12, i.e. C3, monitoring environmental conditions. E13. Hazardous Waste Management Program. Develop a plan for disposal of various types of hazardous waste. Base plan on national, regional, and local requirements. Train in waste disposal. E14. Hazardous Waste Management Process. Example of hazardous waste management process. E15. Fire Prevention Program. Develop a fire prevention and control plan that includes reporting based on national, regional, and local requirements. Train. Preparedness. Reporting fires, warning alarms, fire extinguisher location. And use. Evacuation. Mitigation. Response. E16. Emergency Management Program. Preparedness. Response. Recovery. Mitigation. E17. Emergency Management Program. Plans. Mitigation-based risk assessment to internal and external threats, preparedness, training and drills, first aid, fire and electrical malfunction, evacuation, response, roles, responsibilities, and actions, staff contact list, evacuation routes, recovery, roles, responsibilities, and actions, maintaining operations, resuming operations. E18. Radiation Safety Program. Assess risk. Consider national and regional requirements for handling radioactive substances. Implement appropriate engineering and work practices. E19. Radiation Safety Program. Plan. Minimize exposure. PP containment equipment. Signage posted. Monitor. Environmental radiation levels. Radiation safety badges. Provide instructions for action when levels are exceeded. E20. Radiation Safety Program. Training. Train on the program and record/document training. Case study. New Analyzer ABC FS5. QC Facilities and Safety Requirement Application to Analyzer ABC Safety Programs. The Automated Testing Section Supervisor reviewed the safety implications of New Analyzer ABC for each of the laboratory's safety programs. Biosafety. Standard precautions apply. Chemical hygiene plan. The SDSs for each reagent were reviewed. Occupational health. The organization's program applies. Hazardous waste management. The new reagents can be disposed of into the regular waste stream. Fire prevention. The analyzer uses standard current and poses no fire risks different from other analyzers. Emergency management. The organization's program applies. Training. The laboratory's safety training program applies. Laboratory leaders are accountable for providing a safe work environment, which includes effective design and management of the physical environment, assessment of risks, adherence to all national, regional, and local requirements, supporting safety programs, training to the safety programs, new staff, and refresher training. Recording all training. Key messages. QC facilities and safety. Conclusion. Thank you.